Well, good evening, folks. Make sure my audio here is set up and allow some time for some people to jump on here. It's kind of a late scheduled show this evening. Had a few extra minutes before the beginning of Iowa and Maryland. So wanted to jump on and discuss what was a very active day in the transfer portal today as it relates to college football. We can talk Iowa, Maryland, of course, as our title of this video indicated, but I want to get people's thoughts on the activity because we, of course, saw how active the transfer portal was heading into this week. Of course, with the bowl season winding down, you're going to see more and more players enter. But we kind of at least assumed that the majority of the quarterback carousel, if you will, was over. That is not the case, as we saw today. I counted 3 starters at least in the last 24 hours. So I'm going to validate that here. And again, if I've missed anybody, you're free to jump in the comments, free to give us a call. This is what I've got so far as quarterbacks. And of course, you know, if you followed my content here from the Hawkeye of the Storm, that I am pro Iowa getting into the transfer portal at quarterback. Do I believe? Okay, that's a separate discussion. Do I believe Iowa is going to hit the transfer portal hard for a quarterback? I do not. But that's not the topic at hand here. So, take a look at this. So we did get word today that Haynes Gibson, quarterback at Iowa State, entered the portal. Of course, he has not played. He is a Power 5 quarterback, but we're talking about guys who are starters. All right. We start with the biggest news story of the day, and that was the entry of Caleb Williams into the transfer portal. As you know, to give everybody a rundown of who Caleb Williams is, if you don't already know, Caleb Williams, the starter at Oklahoma, took over for Spencer Rattler after he was benched by Lincoln Riley. If you don't know the backstory on Lincoln Riley, not only was he the head coach at Oklahoma following the tenure of Bob Stoops, he was also the quarterback's coach. So he was one of the, I don't know how many head coaches are also the position coach at quarterback, but that's not real common. I mean, typically you have an offensive coordinator who is a quarterback's coach, or you have a situation like at Iowa where you have a exclusive quarterback's coach, if you will, in Ken O'Keefe. So Lincoln Riley was Caleb Williams and Spencer Rattler's QB's coach. Obviously, he gave the nod to Caleb Williams midseason. So Spencer Rattler, of course, enters the transfer portal. There was no surprise about that. He goes to South Carolina. Lincoln Riley then dips out before the season's over to head to USC. Now, why is that noteworthy? The nod ahead of Spencer. So one would think that potentially USC is on the board for Caleb Williams. One would think. At least I would think that. Okay. USC, of course, losing Kedon Slovis. Now, I've not looked recently at USC's board here, and I'm going to pull that up while we're talking because, again, this is all very fascinating to me. Again, Kedon Slovis heading to Pittsburgh. But I don't know what USC's quarterback room looks like. So if anybody wants to comment on here or give us a call and fill me in on this, because I am intrigued by it. But the fact that, again, Lincoln Riley's at USC now and Caleb Williams is going to the portal would make me think that they certainly would have an opportunity to grab Caleb Williams. Again, I have nothing to base that on other than what I just led you through. Another starter who entered the portal today, Grant Wells. You say, who's that? Well, he was a starter at Marshall. And let's just recognize for a second, you may say, well, why would Iowa go after a guy at Marshall? Well, we heard Kirk Ferentz speak earlier this month, well, actually last month now, we're in January, and he talked about how typically the guys that Iowa even targets really are guys who are either playing at the FCS level or playing at the Group of 5 level. I would like for Iowa to go after some of these portal quarterbacks who are at the Power 5 level, who are proven. There have been more than ever before that have entered the portal. We've talked about the candidates, Bo Nix, Kedon Slovis, Adrian Martinez, etc. But a guy like Grant Wells, again, I'm not saying they should or shouldn't. I'm just telling you who has entered the portal, all right? The numbers for Grant Wells that I pulled up here for anybody who doesn't want to have to do that, do the work to find those. This past season, 2021, he started, had a 140 passer rating, 8.0 yards per attempt, and a 66.4% completion mark. Those are all better by a long shot than anybody on Iowa's roster. Of course, the two guys who had significant time this year for Iowa, Spencer Petras and Alex Padilla. So again, I'm not endorsing it. I understand it's a different level of competition, so please don't bring that up and claim that Corey's claiming that Iowa needs to go after Grant Wells. But I'm just giving you, these are guys who are starting at the Division I and the FBS level who have entered today, okay? This should be, all of this discussion that we're having here should be it should indicate to you this is a microcosm of what is happening throughout this entire offseason. This is not just start today, okay? And if it did just if you're just catching up today, you're behind by quite a bit because again, I can't even name on two hands the number of starting FBS quarterbacks that have entered the portal. I mean, I would have no way of doing that. And a couple of years ago, we would have never been able to do that. And a lot of these guys are Power 5 starters. Another guy who we haven't talked about. Let me block the bot that just commented in the live chat. Another guy we didn't bring up, and I hope I pronounce his last name correctly. If you're an Iowa State fan, you know who he is because he beat your Cyclones this year in Morgantown. That's Daggy. Jarrett Daggy. So he was a starter. He began his career at Bowling Green, ended up at West Virginia, and I tweeted about this earlier today, and I've watched a little bit. I mean, he didn't pop out to me on tape as being a guy who's just, tossing it all over the yard, although he had some games that were impressive. Again, playing at a good level in the Big 12. But here are his numbers. Daggy finished the season with a 65.2% completion percentage, 7.3 yards per attempt, a 136 passer rating, all of which, again, are an upgrade from anything Iowa has had. So again, please don't accuse me of claiming that I want every single guy I'm bringing up. I'm just simply stating that, first of all, these guys have started. Daggy and certainly Caleb Williams have started at the Power 5 level. And even a guy like Wells has started at the FBS level. And all of these guys, from a numbers standpoint, from the information we have currently, would be an upgrade from what we currently have at Iowa. That's just a fact. You may say, well, Iowa can do better than Jarrett Daggy. I'll tell you what, I'll put this very simply for anybody who wants to make that claim. If you told me today that Iowa was pushing hard for Jarrett Daggy out of West Virginia, I would be doing cartwheels in the front yard, okay? Because I don't believe Iowa is going after anybody at the quarterback position in the portal. That shouldn't be as a surprise to anybody. I don't believe it's going to happen. I want it to happen. I want it badly, but I don't believe it is happening. So, again, yes, and I do see this comment from Erica about I'll just pop this up for everybody who can't see the live chat. I read on Twitter that there's some sort of scandal or something that he didn't thank the West Virginia fans and his message out. Watched a random video from West Virginia channel that came up on my feed. I don't know anything about that. I don't know. And again, this stuff just broke today. These are all guys who entered the portal today. So I haven't had time to do any more research than what I just broke down for you, and that is the stats associated with each one of these starters. But again, these aren't the only guys still available. Now, there are, we mentioned Haynes Gibson from Iowa State. Matt, is it Vellecci from Colorado State, didn't play this year. He also entered today. So in total, just today, 5 FBS quarterbacks entered the portal, 4 of which are Power 5 quarterbacks, 3 of which are starters. That's impressive. Baylor Romney, another guy, entered the portal on New Year's Eve. He played a little bit at BYU. Was not the starter. I read a lot of content earlier today that he was considered the best backup in the country. I'm not saying Iowa needs to go after a backup BYU quarterback. I will say this, BYU has made it clear they know how to evaluate talent at the quarterback position. When we think about Zach Wilson, who Iowa was in on hard. He ends up going to BYU, and now he's a starter for the New York Jets. Kyle Van Treese is another guy from Buffalo, and no, Don Patterson does not know Kyle. Of course, Don was at Buffalo just years ago. But again, I don't believe he was starting there. Sofian Masood from Houston. Things kind of slowed down a bit. Lucas Johnson, another guy. They're not going to go after Lucas Johnson. He doesn't fit into the Iowa way. Again, Connor Bazelak, have not heard anything about him, his recruitment. Of course, he was the co-SEC Freshman of the Year at Missouri. Levi Williams did commit, so he's off the board. The kid that I was a little bit excited about because he was dual threat, and he also had a connection to Iowa through Tim Polasek, who was his position coach at Wyoming. He ended up committing to Utah State. I believe his girlfriend is at Utah State. Braxton Burmeister still on the board from Virginia Tech, the starter. Casey Thompson from Texas. 247 is now predicting he is heading to Nebraska. Again, when he initially entered the portal, 247 had him as a possible TCU pickup. Now the whatever they call that, the crystal ball or whatever they want to call that, says he's headed to Nebraska. Jason Brown from South Carolina. Looks like he's predicted to Virginia Tech. We know Bo Nix is headed to Oregon. Zach Calzada still on the board. Still on the board. There were talks about him going to Pittsburgh. Well, Slovis took that spot, so Calzada doesn't have a home, we would assume. Taquan Roberson, the kid from Penn State, is headed to UConn. And I'm not naming them all. I'm just giving you some of the big names that pop off the board. Cameron Ward, maybe the best quarterback in the portal, certainly from a numbers standpoint. Now, again, I understand this is the FCS level, but the kid from Incarnate Word, who's wanted by Ole Miss and a number of schools, he's still on the board theoretically. Max Johnson from LSU, he's on the board. Or excuse me, he was off the board. He went to Texas A&M. Of course, Penix goes to Washington. Tyson Fumachon. I've been talking about this kid for weeks. Now, I don't know, is there a backstory with him? Is he just taking his time? A little bit strange that he's still on the board. Again, he entered the portal in early December. It's been a month now. A month ago today, Tyson Fumachon entered the portal. And, of course, he was recruited by Iowa. We mentioned Martinez. He's headed to where his girlfriend's at Kansas State. But there's still guys. I mean, Deuce Hogan hasn't even found a school yet. Jack Plummer hasn't announced. We heard up and down that he was headed to Cal. I see nothing official from Jack Plummer. Zach Annexstad from Minnesota, he's still on the board. Spencer Rattler, of course, we mentioned him, headed to South Carolina. Zach Gibson from Akron, headed to Georgia Tech. Jack Miller, of course, from Ohio State, he's headed to Florida. Dylan Gabriel from UCF, headed to Oklahoma. Maddox Kopp from Houston, headed to Colorado. And again, I'm just scratching the surface. These are the big names. Chubba Purdy, I guess he's still on the board. Don't know how highly recruited he's being pursued by schools right now. Harrison Bailey from Tennessee, he's out there as well. So, I mean, and it's going to continue. I have no doubt it's going to continue. Now, again, the Caleb Williams one was maybe the biggest shocker of the day, certainly. Although I don't know the backstory with Jarrett Daggy. But I will say this, as far as Caleb Williams is concerned, that should not surprise anybody because, let's be honest, the coaching change, you would have to think would have, again, not only was Lincoln Riley his head coach, he was also his position coach at quarterback. So, again, that's what would lend me to believe that he may end up at USC. I did see Brent Venables in that athletic department. Of course, Brent Venables, the new head coach at Oklahoma, he did release a statement. They released a joint statement that basically said, we're hopeful that he stays. That's basically what it said in so many words. We're hopeful that that Caleb Williams stays. So that may very well happen. He may just be out there. I mean, that's what the transfer portal is. Technically, all of these kids could return to school. In answer to Erica's question here about Deuce Hogan, he's not coming back to Iowa. I would be shocked. It would take so many mended fences for that to happen. First of all, he hasn't scratched the surface for playing time. And then you have the situation with Kirk Ferentz. You have his mom's post on social media. He's not coming back here. So again, it is what it is. I wish him the best. I don't want to see him end up in the FCS, but you know, guys transfer. Some of these guys like Jarrett Daggy, the kid at West Virginia, they transfer more than once. So Hogan could end up at Incarnate Word next year, and then he transfers back up to Texas A&M if he plays well. I mean, those are the types of things that are possible. I don't have any reason to think that'll happen, but I have not heard anything about where Deuce Hogan may be headed or who's targeting him. I've heard nothing. Now, if somebody knows something I don't, I'm sure he's gotten contact by somebody. One would have to think. If I'm an outside school, especially a group of 5 school, I'm looking at Deuce Hogan long and hard because if I study how Iowa evaluates quarterbacks, A, I'm not impressed, all right? And B, I also recognize that a guy like Cody Sokol, if you remember him at Iowa back in 2013, he leaves after losing the job to Jake Rudock. had a terrific career at Louisiana Tech. Now, Iowa did a good job evaluating those quarterbacks. I think those 3 quarterbacks, Sokol, Beathard, and Rudock, were all terrific. That was a great trio of quarterbacks, and unfortunately, they couldn't play them all. So Sokol ended up having a great career, but just because Deuce Hogan didn't play here, I would not write him off to be a successful group of 5 or even Power 5 quarterback. I've said up and down, I would love to see what he would have done in an Iowa jersey had he been afforded playing time. Now, again, I'm not there at practice every day, so I have no idea if he would have been successful in this system at this level, but I would have loved to have seen it. So we'll wait and see what happens with Deuce Hogan, but he is not coming back to Iowa. All right, I want to catch up on some comments here. Again, appreciate everybody jumping on here late to the. Again, this is sort of a last minute broadcast before we jump on for the Maryland game this evening. Good to see you, Erica. Good to see you, Nick. And of course, we'll be on here afterwards. After the Iowa-Maryland game, we'll be on here with Coach Close recapping the game. That'll be at about 10 p.m. Central Time following Iowa and Maryland. Good question from Erica. Jack Kerney is headed to the NFL. My thoughts. Well, my thoughts are very simple. He's been here 5 years. I'm not surprised by it. Do I feel like he could have benefited from another year? Yes. But how much? I'm getting less and less surprised. I'm less and less surprised every time I hear of a kid who has eligibility remaining choosing to leave. It's just the way things are now. And it's understandable from Jack Kerney's perspective. He is undersized, but heck, we've seen undersized safeties make it in the league. Of course, Bob Sanders comes to mind. Geno Stone has certainly been a success, as has Desmond King. I know he's not necessarily always playing safety. He's playing corner as well. But Iowa, I think from the pedigree that Iowa has with defensive backs, it's a fine decision from Jack to leave. I wish him the best. I hope he gets drafted high, and I'm impressed and proud of him for sticking with it through the bowl game when many players are opting out, even when their draft status is in question. So we know Iowa's fine at DB. They've got pieces in waiting. Quinn Schulte got some time this year. Sebastian Castro played a little on Saturday. And, of course, we know about Mr. X himself. Xavier Wampa will be coming in next year, along with several other defensive backs. Cohen and Tringa, TJ Hall, Orlando Tucker. A lot of guys in that defensive backfield will be competing for playing time, if not this coming spring. Of course, Xavier will be there, but if not this coming spring and the summer and, of course, into fall camp. The Real Hayden says, everybody knows we're not getting a quarterback in the Thomas. I'd take Kai Thomas. That was interesting. Well, I agree. I would take Kai Thomas as well. I'm not surprised by that at Minnesota. Of course, Kai Thomas, one of the guys who was playing primarily there at the end for the Gophers. But, of course, they're so stacked at running back. They're getting Ibrahim back next year. So that didn't surprise me at all. I don't see Iowa targeting him for a couple of reasons. A, I think they feel pretty good about where we're at running back. I would not be surprised to see Iowa get or at least go after a portal running back, but I don't think you're going to be able to appeal to a guy like Thomas. Maybe they would. Maybe he would come in and start. But, man, what we saw from Gavin Williams and LaShawn Williams on Saturday made me pretty optimistic about that unit. And then, of course, again, we don't know Devin Hilson's status. Will he stick at running back? I'm impressed by what I've seen on tape from Jazzian Patterson. Caleb Johnson, I've talked up and down about his size coming in as a freshman next year out of Ohio. So, yeah, that is interesting. I will be a little bit surprised if they go after Thomas, but, man, I don't think you can turn a kid like that down. He was terrific for Minnesota throughout much of this year. Nick says that Caleb Williams sounds like a Hawkeye already. Push for this kid like you never pushed before. I'm pushing as hard as I can, Nick. I don't have much leverage. I will say this. And I replied to somebody on Twitter about this earlier today. Let's not forget, and I'm not saying, I'm sure people think that I stretch on my connections, and that's true. When I see any connections to Iowa, I try to draw them. Tyson Fumachon, I brought him up because he played high school ball with Nico Reganey. He was offered by Iowa. Again, those sorts of connections you think would help Iowa in a recruiting pitch now at this point in his career. We brought up Levi Williams at Wyoming. He was coached by Tim Polasek, his position coach at Wyoming. That didn't make a difference. He's headed to Utah State. So connections don't always mean anything. Another connection that I brought up in the past is if a guy like Casey Thompson ends up at TCU, perhaps you get a guy like Max Dugan from Council Bluffs who comes back into the state of Iowa or wants to transfer back closer to home, and Iowa could be in on him. And, of course, they offered Max. But the connection here with Caleb Williams is simple. The last coach to coach him in the bowl game was Bob Stoops. And you and I both know Bob Stoops is a huge Iowa fan. Now, maybe Bob's also, I'm sure, if you had to ask me, chances are Bob Stoops is probably not involved here, right? He's not involved either way. I know his son is at Oklahoma. I don't know how much eligibility he has left there, but my guess is Bob's not actively talking to Caleb Williams. And Bob has a lot of loyalty to Oklahoma as well. And Oklahoma, we saw that statement from Brent Venables. They are very much into the possibility of Caleb Williams returning, despite the fact that he entered the portal, as opposed to in Iowa where Deuce Hogan enters and you're basically saying, see you later. So Caleb Williams could stay at Oklahoma, but there is the connection with Bob Stoops coaching in the bowl game. Perhaps if he really is set on leaving, that he could put a good word in for Iowa. That's just a connection. I'm not saying it's going to happen. It is a connection. I take Caleb Williams, says Hayden. Our staff wouldn't even know what to do with a talent like him if we got him. Did pretty well with Brad Banks. I know it was a long time ago. Maybe even you claim it's a different Kirk, but a long time ago. And Hayden, we will talk to you after the game. Enjoy the game. Be loud at Carver and be safe on the way out. I know that there was a lot of melting across Iowa, so the roads may get kind of dicey this evening. Erica, has anyone heard anything about Lindsey? I know he got back on the field after his injury, but is he really okay? I would assume that he would not have come back into that game with his draft stock as high as it is, unless the doctors were absolutely sure he was fine. So my guess is he is fine. I don't know a timeline as far as him making a decision or an announcement. I would be shocked if he hasn't already decided, but perhaps he's waiting to announce. I don't know. My guess is he's gone. I'm not putting any stock in him coming back. I will be surprised if he comes back. I won't be shocked because I think he's a Hawkeye through and through. But I will be surprised. I'm not going to be hurt if he leaves because I expect it. So, hope for the best, expect the worst is how I would describe it. Yes, the portal is absolutely getting busier every day. Nick, watch out. Petrus might be watching this. I couldn't care less. Look, I like Spencer. I've talked him up time and time again. I think it's ridiculous and disgraceful. We heard Spencer Petrus talking to the media after the bowl game about how his mom has to read some pretty nasty comments on social media about Spencer. A couple things in response to that. I think that's a disgrace that fans are going to take personal shots at Spencer and his character. Anybody who's listened to my stuff or my stuff with Mark Rogers or Don Patterson, I have been very outspoken as of the last month that I don't believe Spencer Petrus is the right guy to lead this offense. I just don't. But I've also acknowledged that I think that's coaching. I don't believe QB development is where it needs to be here. And Spencer's not forcing his way onto the field. Kirk Ferentz, Brian Ferentz, Ken OKeefe, these guys are deciding to play Spencer. So whether you agree with it or not, the fact of the matter is that it's not his fault. He wants to start. I don't blame the kid. So I'm not going to take a personal shot at Spencer Petrus. But I do think it's disgraceful when people do that. The other part of this is, and I'm not the mother of a Division I athlete, but man alive, if you're Spencer Petrus' mom, why are we even seeking this information out? And maybe it's just coming onto her timeline but man, get off Twitter. If it's that nasty and it's hurting you emotionally, it's not worth it. Twitter is not worth it. Social media is not worth it. I hate that it's happening. I hate that you have to say get off social media. But man alive, you're right. Spencer Petrus does not deserve harassment, vulgarities, whatever the case may be, ostracism. And I'm sad that his mom has to deal with that and that he has to deal with that. But I'm also going to criticize him fairly, and I'm going to criticize the coaches even more so because you can't just say, well, that criticism's mean. No, it's not mean. It's just laying out facts. It's laying out opinion. And between those two things, you can reach conclusions. But I'm not going to change my feeling on Spencer Petrus. If he's watching this show, then he's not watching the show. I don't know why we're entertaining that thought. But, look, he's got to get better. And I know he's getting work with Tony Rasiopi. I'm talking about the wrestler. I'm talking about the QB's coach out east. I know he's getting private work from him. I think that's ridiculous that he has to go out east when Iowa's paying your offensive coordinator just short of $700,000 a year to coach your quarterbacks. But at the same time, I want Spencer to be the best version of himself. If he's Iowa's quarterback moving forward, I want him to improve. I don't have a ton of hope that he's going to improve drastically, but man, I will be shocked. I said this on Saturday. I will be very surprised if we don't hear that Alex Padilla is entering the transfer portal. I'd be very surprised. I know it was talked about during the postgame show on Saturday, and I said that I think at the time I said I wouldn't be surprised. I will be surprised if he doesn't at this point, because just reflecting back, the fact that he didn't see the field on Saturday, I don't blame the kid. I don't blame the kid. Yes, Erica, Tyson is still out there. Have not heard much of anything. I did hear a list of schools that were interested in him at least several weeks ago. But again, we're talking about Tyson Fumachon, the backup at Clemson, who entered the portal a month ago. He is dual threat. Didn't have great stats when he played at Clemson, but he was also stuck behind a guy, DJ, is it Ugugalele? I can never pronounce his last name, who was pretty highly hyped heading into the season. I know it didn't pan out necessarily as Clemson envisioned, although they did end up 10-3. I wouldn't necessarily judge Tyson Fumachon by the few minutes that he played. But again, Iowa's had plenty of time to reach out or evaluate him if they were going to do so. So I would probably say that ship has sailed if there was ever a ship in the first place. Jared the actor, the Hawks have no pedigree of successful QB transfers. This makes the prospect of getting any interest very unlikely. I'll say this, Jared, and I know Brad Banks was a long time ago. I think it's ridiculous, and I want to talk tomorrow to Mark Rogers during our weekly show, which is, if you didn't know, we do a weekly show with Mark Rogers, an Iowa show over the Voice of College Football, once a week, Tuesdays at 4:30 p.m. But I'll say this, I think it's ridiculous that it seems like every year, and of course, the transfer portal is so young, it's so fresh, that it's hard to really say this definitively, but it seems to me that the same programs consistently get brought up with transfers. And I'm talking Georgia. I'm talking, Alabama doesn't appear as much as maybe you'd think, but they're also getting number 1 and number 2 national recruiting classes every day. Every year. Iowa's not getting that. All right. They're not going to get that. As much as we want that, it's not going to happen. Iowa found a way into the top 25, 26 this year, according to a couple of different websites. I know 247 had them fringe top 25 range as far as their 22 recruiting class. But the fact of the matter is that's going to be almost the ceiling. It's going to be hard to break that top 15, top 20 on a year in and year out basis. These last 2 years have been impressive, but it's just not going to happen. So that would tell me that Iowa's going to have to go to the portal. Iowa should be a school, as much as you want to talk about development, and development's huge. If you want to break through that glass ceiling and you want to be able to compete with the likes of Michigan, Ohio State, and I'm just talking Big Ten schools, right? Penn State, Wisconsin, these teams that are now Wisconsin's unique. They kind of do it in an organic fashion, although recruiting wise, they tend to have better classes in Iowa. But I would think Iowa's in a position where you need to be going after transfers. And yet we're the opposite. Iowa, we hardly ever hear anything about transfers. Now, you can bring up Jack Heflin, Mekhi Sargent, Van Valkenburg, Charlie Jones. They do use the portal. I admit that. And I know that the thought process is we want to go after guys who other schools are not seeing, who may fly under the radar. Why can Iowa not go after the big names? Why are we just too scared? Are we too nervous to go after the big names? Or we just lack that much confidence? That's really disconcerting. And I want to talk about that with Mark Rogers tomorrow. But you just never hear Iowa's name associated with any of these guys at quarterback. And I'm not even talking about, Iowa reached out or contacted Fumachon or Calzada or Caleb Williams. And I know Williams just entered the portal today, so we'll see. But just from a report, like the fact that national reporters, and I see these guys on Twitter all the time, national college football reporters, they automatically, like for instance, I'll give you an example of this. Following the news that, and maybe I can't, let me see if I can find this. Following the news that Caleb Williams was entering the portal, and I don't know where it's at. I'm not going to look for this forever, but I did see a college football reporter who basically said, off the top of my head, it sounds like Georgia. He didn't even mention USC, but Georgia and a couple other Power 5 schools. And I know Georgia's in the national championship game, but there were a couple other schools that were not in the playoff this year. All right. Ole Miss may have been one of them. I know Ole Miss has been very active in the portal, and that doesn't surprise me given who their head coach is. But even these national college football writers and reporters, they never think of Iowa as being a candidate for any of these big name transfer quarterbacks. Now, why is that? I would love to know the actual answer. Because what's sad about it is I think I know the answer because it's recognized even through the national media, the national college football media, exactly what was said here. Was it Hayden that said this, right? That Iowa, let me find this. Everybody knows that we're not getting a quarterback in the portal. Why does everybody know that? Isn't that sad? And I'm not saying Hayden's wrong. That's what's sad about it. Isn't that ridiculous that everybody knows? Again, I keep holding out hope, right? That somehow Iowa's going to go in the portal and at least contact somebody. But it's ridiculous with as bad a quarterback play as we suffered through this year. And it's true. The numbers bear it out. The quarterback play here was porous, regardless of who was starting, whether it was Padilla or whether it was Petrus. It was not good. So the fact that it can be that poor, Iowa was in the Big Ten championship game, and yet it's just an assumption. It's just a foregone conclusion that Iowa's not going into the portal. How ridiculous is that? That's what's sad about it. And it's just, again, I understand Kirk Ferentz's philosophy. I find it ridiculous, though, that that's the assumption throughout the national landscape in the national media, because I have not heard Iowa's name attached to anybody. There was a rumor that Iowa was after Adrian Martinez. That wasn't substantiated. I think that was started on the message boards and on Twitter. I don't think there was any validity behind it. So the fact of the matter is I have not heard Iowa's name attached to any of these quarterbacks, despite the fact that you could argue that Iowa had one of the least productive quarterback units in the entire conference. That is sad. That is sad. And again, I want to talk with Mark about this tomorrow during our live show. All right. Eric, Labus have any chance of starting next year? Man, I sure hope so. He's got a chance, right? I mean, if he doesn't have a chance of starting in year two, if basically the assumption is that we're not starting a quarterback for at least 2 of their first 3 years. Now, I know Nate Stanley started his sophomore year, but if that's the assumption, that's ridiculous. Absolutely. Given how, again, I hate to use the word poor. That sounds like I'm being mean. I'm not trying to be mean to anybody. Given how poor Iowa's quarterbacks performed this year, I would have to think that Joey Labus has an excellent chance of starting. In addition to the fact that I would probably say at this point, I'd say it's probable that Alex Padilla transfers. I will be surprised if Alex Padilla does not transfer. I'm sure Alex Padilla is a very smart kid, though. He may feel like his window has sort of waned because, man, there's a lot of portal quarterbacks out there who are still available and a lot of portal quarterbacks who have already gotten taken. So where is he going to go with a chance to start right away? Maybe he feels like his best chance is starting here, but man alive, the fact that he didn't play at all in the bowl game will not shock me to see him leave. But absolutely, Joey Labus should have a chance to start somewhere else. Start here next year. And Alex Padilla, I would think, has a good chance of going somewhere else. Yakov 22, yes, we talked about this. Would Iowa reach out to Caleb Williams? Should Iowa reach out to Caleb Williams? Those are 2 different questions. 2 totally different questions. Should Iowa reach out? Anybody that says no is probably not in their right mind. Or they're getting paid off to say so. Because it's ridiculous to even act like Iowa doesn't have a need. I mean, again, how hard is it to pick up a phone and call someone? You're telling me that Kirk Ferentz and his Iowa coaching staff doesn't have connections to Caleb Williams? Again, I just brought up the biggest connection. You're telling me that Kirk Ferentz doesn't have Bob Stoops in his contacts? Come on. That's ridiculous. So how hard would it be for Kirk Ferentz to call Bob Stoops and say, hey, can I get Caleb Williams' number? Can I get, maybe Bob doesn't have Caleb Williams' number, but this is not hard. All right. This is not hard at all. It's very easy to contact kids today who are in the portal. Now, I'm sure a bunch of schools are contacting Caleb Williams, but that doesn't mean anything. Again, this loser's mentality that we seem to have, unfortunately, that, well, we're just not going to contact somebody because we assume we can't get them. That is a loser's mentality, right? And I'm not saying that Kirk Ferentz is a loser. I'm not inferring that, but it's a loser's mentality to think that way, that why even try to do something because we'll fail. That is, and I hope that's not the mentality from the outside looking in. That seems to be the mentality for me. Nick says, if they don't, they're as bad at evaluating QBs as we thought. If you don't at least give effort to get Caleb, then they need to go bag groceries somewhere. Well, I mean, heck, I'm not quite sure. I'll say this. We talked about the Beathard-Rudock situation. We talked about the Christensen-Stanzi situation. I know there are some different pieces of this coaching staff here now than were there then. But the one constant, or the two constants, would be Kirk Ferentz and Ken O'Keefe, right? They were there not with the Beathard situation, but with the Stanzi-Christensen situation. I don't necessarily believe that Iowa's great at evaluating quarterbacks, but I also don't know that Iowa's great at developing quarterbacks, right? It's a fair statement. I will say this to make it clear that I'm not just going out of my way to rip Iowa. They are tremendous at developing tight ends. They are tremendous, I think, at developing linebackers, defensive backs, etc. So you can't be perfect. I'm just acknowledging the fact, what I think is obvious, that no, Iowa's not good at developing them. And so I would guess they're not probably very good at evaluating them. And again, Padilla-Petrus, that situation would lend itself, from me, my vantage point, to believe that very statement that Iowa's not good at evaluating. Because again, in 2020, early 2020, we were told there was a huge gap between Petrus and Padilla. There was no doubt really heading into the season that Petrus was the starter. There was no talk about Padilla coming in for Petrus besides people in the media and fans. And then finally, Petrus does go down with an injury. We see Padilla and we're like, oh, maybe he's not that far behind. Perhaps he's actually right with Spencer, or maybe a little ahead. But again, we head to the bowl game and we see nothing of Padilla once Petrus is healthy. So I wouldn't necessarily endorse Iowa's ability to evaluate quarterbacks at this point, but it's hard to know because we didn't see Deuce Hogan. We didn't see very much of Alex Padilla. I mean, we saw him for a few games, but heck, we didn't see him at all last year, really. So, yeah, unless you're behind closed doors, it's hard to really evaluate Iowa's ability to evaluate. Blake, I like the huddles of Robbie Ashford. Robbie Ashford. Somebody's going to have to tell me who Robbie Ashford is. This is the kid from Oregon? Robbie Ashford. So is he in the... I haven't heard anything about him in the portal. So he was class of, I believe, 2020, correct? Yeah, he's class of 2020. So I'm trying to figure out if... I did not hear anything about him entering the portal. Let me check here. Let me check here, Blake. Unless I'm crazy, I did not hear anything about him entering the portal. I was wrong. You're right. Appreciate that you bring this up. I'm just seeing this from Pete Thamel. Tweet from 3 hours ago. Oregon quarterback Robbie Ashford has entered the transfer portal. Expect him to end up there in the next 24 hours. So that's why I haven't seen him, because he's not technically there yet. But according to Pete Thamel, he will be there. And he was the number 15 dual threat quarterback in the country. Let me pull up his offers. I don't remember that name as far as Iowa being in on him. And of course, Iowa's not in on a lot of dual threat guys. Yeah, I'm not seeing Iowa anywhere on the list. 6'4", 219, according to 247 Sports, out of Hoover, Alabama. So yeah, there's another one. But again, I don't know. Did he play at all? I know Blake's bringing up the huddle tape. That would be it's another one, though. This is going to continue, folks. I don't know how long it's going to continue, but it's going to continue. I had said about a month ago that by the time we hit January 1st, Iowa's open period for at least going after a quarterback would be empty, over. I was wrong, because there's more quarterbacks entering. I just don't. At some point, the period, the open period, if you will, where Iowa's got a shot at grabbing one of these guys, is going to be out. Hawkeye Elvis would say it's time to rock and roll the portal. Well, I would have to agree with Hawkeye Elvis, Destiny Pirate. Hope you made it back safely, back to Iowa. Yakov 22, I can't see Iowa taking a swing at Caleb Williams. He may still return to Oklahoma. And yes, you would assume he's the guaranteed starter at Oklahoma. Why would he leave? He would leave because he was obviously a Lincoln Riley fan. It was his position coach, and Lincoln Riley's gone. So I don't have a problem with it. And if he feels like his door is open to come back, I would not be shocked at all if he talked to Venables and that staff and said, hey, if I enter the portal, can I come back? And they probably said, absolutely, but just give us a chance. And if they said that, what's wrong with going into the portal and detecting interest. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. Ray says we have a better chance of now Kinnick returning from the afterlife. Boy, isn't that sad if it's the truth? You might be right. Chad says, does Iowa need to move on from Ken O'Keefe to attract more playmakers at quarterback? Two things to that, Chad. Iowa's not moving on from Ken O'Keefe unless Ken O'Keefe hangs it up. Ken O'Keefe, I believe, is 68 years old. I don't think Ken O'Keefe is going to scare a quarterback away. Again, I've stated that I don't believe Ken's doing a good enough job at this point. But I just don't see Kirk ever doing anything. He's not going to fire his buddy, Ken O'Keefe. Now, again, maybe Ken is in a position where he's close to retiring. I don't know what Ken's plans are. He's 68 years old, so you'd have to think he's close. But I don't know that would be what would hold other coaches. I think the biggest thing holding other players from coming to Iowa right now is Iowa. It's Iowa not contacting other players. I don't have any proof to say that Iowa is not going to be able to attract somebody. You have to contact somebody. You have to actually get a gauge to know if players are willing to come here. Erica says coaches have no business having Spencer starting. He's an awesome person. He's just not the right person to lead the team offensively at this point. Maybe he develops in the offseason. I don't have any reason to think that's going to happen to the point where Iowa needs it to happen. But again, that's a fair statement. Just because you're a good person doesn't mean you're the right position, the right guy to lead an offense. Jared the actor, Ken O'Keefe should be ashamed based on his salary. Hey, you make the money they give you, right? Whether you're doing a good job or not. So I don't blame him. I blame Iowa, right? Somebody's got to hold somebody accountable. That's just how any job works. When you're making that much money, I agree. You got to do better. The man here, did you see an enormous talent gap between Georgia and Michigan? I did on that day, but I also saw an enormous talent gap between Iowa and Michigan. I think we read into results a little bit too much at times. I think if Georgia and Michigan played 10 times, Georgia would win probably 7-8. I don't think they'd win all 10. But certainly on Saturday or Friday, we saw quite a big talent gap there. Destiny Pirate says we do have to keep focusing on sportsmanship, fanship. Some fans booed Kentucky. Some yelled blankety blank about the quarterbacks and coaches. Loyalty in class in our tradition. Winning is great. Self-respect more so. Absolutely agree with that. And I did not like the fans who were booing guys who were down with injuries. Maybe they were faking. I saw a video of somebody that looked like he took a dive, but again, it was 100 degrees in the field. So it's possible that guys were cramping up. Tight lines, you mean the philosophy of punt to win. Again, it goes right into, are we playing to win? Are you playing not to lose? I understand. I understand that frustration with fans. It's frustration of mine, and it's starting to get, I'm getting more and more frustrated year after year. I don't want Kirk Ferentz to wear his welcome out with the fans because I love Kirk Ferentz, but I think at some point you got to do something different, right? That's not a secret. Destiny Pirate, why Iowa has no transfer recognition. Well, they've had some success with guys like Heflin, etc. But you just got to be, I think you got to be a little bit more active. Blake says, I would take Robbie Ashford, but Carson May just probably needs 1 year to learn. Problem is, Blake, Carson May ain't rolling early. So if I know you mentioned Joey, maybe he comes in, plays right away, but I know he was here this year, but maybe he plays next year. Carson May is not starting if he's not enrolling early, and he's not enrolling early. So there's two guys. If Padilla transfers, which I think is a possibility, there are two guys who are possible starters, and that would be Labus or Petrus. That's why Iowa, I believe, needs to go to the portal and see what they can do at attracting somebody. Kurt, how big of an impact did Keegan Johnson not playing have on the bowl game result? Well, it had an impact, right? Iowa's wide receivers weren't involved in that game at all. Not a single catch for, I don't think Reganey had a single catch, and I don't believe Charlie Jones had a single catch. That needs to change. Wide receivers need to be more involved in this offense. And again, that starts with coaching and quarterback play. Steve, I heard today Penn State is in the potential spot for Williams. He's from D.C. That's the other one I did hear. Yeah, and again, Iowa should be there as well, at least as somebody who would like to have Caleb Williams on their roster. No question about it. All right, let's turn our attention to basketball. 1 minute to tip off here, or actually a few more minutes to tip off. I think the tip off's like 8:07. But appreciate this reminding us, go Hawks tonight against the Terps. We'll be here after the game to discuss Iowa and Michigan, Maryland. I'm sorry I didn't get through all the chats. Appreciate everybody. Didn't get to your chat, Bernie. Didn't see Eric on here, but again, Mitchell, Steve, thank you for being here on short notice. We will be here following the game for Iowa postgame with Coach Gary Close. All right, Iowa postgame with Coach Gary Close right here from the Hawkeye of the Storm on YouTube. So tune with us at 10 o'clock just after the game is completed. Of course, this game's on BTN. I do agree. I saw a comment from somebody here. This is, I think, a must-win. Spaghetti Factory, do-or-die game for Iowa. I agree with that. If there's any must-win in January, it's this game. You don't want to fall to 0-3, and you don't want to lose to a team who I believe will probably finish in the bottom third of the Big Ten. You do not want to lose to them at home when you're battling for a tournament spot in March. Thank you for joining us this afternoon or this evening. We will talk to you in a couple hours. I'm Corey Bratta from the Hawkeye of the Storm.